Some moments change everything. You don't see them coming, don't expect them, and when they arrive, they hit like a train, shattering everything you thought you knew about your life. That night, I had no idea that a simple dinner would turn into something I would never be able to forget. I had no idea that a few whispered words would leave me standing there, frozen, questioning everything. It started like any other evening. My husband, Daniel, had been working late almost every night for weeks, trying to impress his boss, Mr. Calloway, a man I had only met once before. He was powerful, wealthy, the kind of man who could make or break careers with a single decision. And that night, Daniel wanted to make sure everything was perfect. "It's just dinner," he had said, adjusting his tie in the mirror, his voice tight with nerves. A chance to show him I'm serious about the promotion. Just be yourself, smile, and please, don't say anything too direct. I had laughed at that, shaking my head. "So, what?" "Just nod and smile while you both talk about the stock market and golf." He had sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just play along. It's important." I hadn't thought much of it at the time. It wasn't the first work dinner I had been dragged to, and I assumed it would be the same as always: polite small talk, forced laughter, a few glasses of wine, and a long night of pretending to be interested in corporate politics. But when we arrived at the restaurant, I felt something shift the moment we stepped inside. Mr. Calloway was already there, sitting at the best table, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my car. He looked up as we approached, his gaze sharp, assessing, like he was sizing me up before I had even said a word. And then, he smiled. "Ah, Daniel," he said, standing up to shake his hand before turning his attention to me. "And this must be the lovely wife I've heard so much about." I smiled politely, but something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. The evening started out normal enough. The conversation revolved around business, Daniel eagerly agreeing with every word Mr. Calloway said, laughing at his jokes even when they weren't funny. I played along, just like my husband had asked me to, sipping my wine and nodding in all the right places. But the entire time, I could feel Mr. Calloway's eyes on me, watching, studying. And then, about halfway through the meal, something changed. Daniel excused himself to take a phone call, leaving me alone with his boss. I expected a moment of awkward silence, but instead, Mr. Calloway leaned in, lowering his voice just enough that no one else could hear. "Tell me," he murmured, his gaze locked onto mine. "How far would you go to help your husband's career?" I blinked, my fingers tightening around the stem of my glass. "Excuse me?" His lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. "Daniel's been working very hard. And I reward hard work. But sometimes a man needs a little extra push, a little incentive." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "I don't know what you're implying." He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I think you do. And I think, if you're smart, you'll consider it." My pulse pounded in my ears. This was a game, I realized. One he had played before. One where he held all the power, where he expected me to understand exactly what he was asking without him ever having to say the words. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. "And what, exactly, are you asking me to consider?" Mr. Calloway's smile widened. "Let's just say, I have certain expectations for the people I promote. And their families. It's a matter of loyalty, of knowing how far someone is willing to go. I like to surround myself with people I can trust." The weight of his words settled over me like a heavy fog, thick and suffocating. He wasn't just talking about Daniel's work ethic. He was talking about me, about what I was willing to do, about whether or not I was a woman who understood how the world really worked. I forced myself to breathe, to keep my expression neutral, even though my stomach twisted in knots. "That's an interesting philosophy." His gaze flickered with amusement. "It's reality." Before I could respond, Daniel returned to the table, smiling obliviously as he sat down, completely unaware of the conversation that had just taken place. Mr. Calloway leaned back in his chair, his demeanor shifting instantly, as if nothing had happened at all. "Ah, Daniel," he said smoothly. "I was just telling your wife how impressed I've been with your dedication. Daniel beamed, completely missing the way I was gripping my napkin so tightly my knuckles had turned white. That means a lot, sir. Really? Mr. Calloway took a sip of his drink, his eyes meeting mine over the rim of his glass. Oh, I have no doubt you'll go far, Daniel. The real question is, how far are you willing to go? Daniel laughed, but I knew, deep down I knew, that this was not a joke. And as I sat there, my heart pounding, I realized something else. This night wasn't just about my husband's promotion. It was about me. And I had no idea what I was going to do next. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur, every word, every glance, every forced smile tinged with the suffocating weight of what had just happened. I barely tasted the food, barely registered the conversation. My mind was spinning, replaying Mr. Calloway's words over and over again, dissecting every syllable, every implication. I needed to tell Daniel. I needed to make him see what kind of man he was working for. But as I looked at my husband, at the eager, hopeful expression on his face, I hesitated. Would he even believe me? Would he even care? The drive home was quiet, almost eerily so. Daniel was in a good mood, humming softly to himself as he tapped his fingers against the steering wheel. I think it went well, he finally said, glancing at me with a satisfied smile. Did you see the way he was talking to me? He's never been that engaged before. I really think I have a shot at this promotion. I stared out the window, my hands clenched in my lap. Yeah, I murmured. I saw. He didn't notice the tension in my voice, didn't notice how stiff I was, how my mind was miles away. And he seemed to like you, Daniel continued, oblivious. That's a good sign. It's always a good sign when the boss takes an interest in the wife. Means he sees me as someone worth investing in. I felt my stomach turn. Is that what you think happened? That he was just interested in me because of you? Daniel chuckled. Of course. It's how these things work, babe. You know that. He wants to make sure I'm stable, that I have a strong home life, a loyal partner. That's why these dinners matter. It's not just about me, it's about us. Us. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. He had no idea. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I should tell him. Would he even believe me? Would he brush it off as paranoia, as overthinking? Or worse, would he see it as an opportunity? That thought sent a sharp chill down my spine. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body coiled tight with unease. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Calloway's smirk, heard the low, measured tone of his voice. How far would you go to help your husband's career? By morning, I knew what I had to do. I had to confront him. I spent the next day debating how to do it, how to phrase it in a way that wouldn't immediately tip my hand. If he was as powerful as Daniel believed, if he truly held my husband's future in his grasp, then I needed to be careful. I needed to be smart. That evening, as Daniel left for the gym, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my recent calls. Mr. Calloway had left his business card on the table the night before, his personal number scrawled across the back in bold, confident strokes. I hesitated only for a second before dialing. He answered on the first ring. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I gripped the phone tighter. We need to talk. I agree. There was a smile in his voice. Shall I assume this means you've been thinking about my offer? My breath caught. He was so sure. So completely, unwaveringly certain that I had spent the past 24 hours doing exactly that, thinking about him, about what he had said, about the implications of refusing him. And the worst part was, he wasn't wrong. I just want to understand, I said carefully. I want to know exactly what it is you're expecting from me. There was a pause, a quiet chuckle. That's a good start. Why don't we meet somewhere more private? Somewhere without your husband hovering in the background. My pulse jumped. And if I say no? His voice remained smooth, composed. Then we pretend this conversation never happened. And your husband? Well, let's just say I'll have to rethink my priorities at the office. A threat. Clear as day. I exhaled slowly, my free hand curling into a fist. Where? There's a hotel downtown. Discreet. Comfortable. I'll text you the details. I felt sick. Fine. Good girl. I hung up before I could hear anything else, my entire body trembling as I stared down at the phone in my hand. What the hell was I doing? What was my plan here? Did I actually think I could outmaneuver a man like Calloway? I looked at my reflection in the mirror across the room, at the woman staring back at me, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes dark with something dangerously close to fury. I didn't know what was going to happen tonight, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let him win. The hotel was exactly what I expected, luxurious, yet impersonal, the kind of place where powerful men conducted their business without fear of consequence. I stepped out of the elevator, my heels clicking against the marble floors, my heart beat loud in my ears. Room 1017. I reached the door, my fingers hovering over the handle for just a second before I knocked. It swung open almost immediately. Mr. Calloway stood there, looking pleased, looking like a man who already knew the outcome of the game he was playing. "You came," he murmured, stepping aside to let me in. I took a breath and walked inside. "Drink?" he offered, moving toward the bar. "No," I said sharply. "Let's just get this over with." His smile widened. "I admire that." Straight to the point. I forced myself to hold his gaze. "Tell me what you really want." He studied me for a moment, then set down the glass he had been holding. "Fine. I want assurance. I want to know that you and your husband understand how things work in my world. I want your loyalty." I lifted my chin. "And if I refuse?" His smile didn't falter. "Then Daniel loses his job." I felt my stomach tighten, the weight of his words pressing down on me. But then, slowly, something shifted inside me. A realization. He wasn't expecting me to fight back. He had done this before, played this exact game with countless others. He thought he had already won, which meant he had underestimated me. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. "That's too bad," I said, pressing play on the recording app that had been running since the moment I stepped into the room. "Because I don't think your board of directors will be too happy about this." For the first time, his confident expression flickered. I smiled. "Checkmate."